That was the London Symphony Orchestra's rendition of The Four Seasons by Antonio Vivaldi. A truly moving and pretentious piece. It's now hour in the county of Howard here in Maryland. A beautiful spring day. My name is Robert Gicking. Greetings and welcome to this special episode of In the Fire. We're so glad you've chosen to join us. We anticipate a bully of a conversation, as we are joined by Sir Andrew Weatherly of Birmingham, England. Hitherto, we shall dialogue about the momentous ministry of missions, contextually, of course. And accordingly, I have requested the esteemed honor of Reverend Patrick Allen's presence for this conversation. Patrick, how are you, old bean?
Rob, what are you doing?
Whatever do you mean, old chap?
Why are you talking like that?
Like what? I don't understand.
In that pretentious British accent. It's just odd.
What are you saying?
That you should stop. It's not, as in you're not pulling it off, dude.
Well, I just wanted our dear fellow Andy to feel welcome and at home, old bean.
Oh, that explains what's going on. I was so confused, Rob. I wasn't sure whether to come in with an American accent. I didn't know whether you want me to say, hello, this is London calling. Yeah.
I mean, it's
So
like
this is not helpful.
It's so confusing. I mean,
fine.
We don't know where we are.
I'm just trying to build bridges across culturals, okay? That's all
I'm not sure that's going to do it, Rob. I think that might destroy some bridges between cultures, if anything. You said we might talk about contextualization, so we need to do that. We need to teach you about some contextualization, Rob.
I suppose that would be useful. Well, welcome back to In the Fire. My name is Rob Gicking. I'm the American pastor of young families at Chapelgate. I'm joined today by the American pastor of spiritual formation and discipleship, Patrick Allen, and the British pastor of all things missions and awesomeness, Andy Weatherly. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Hey, man, we're glad to have you. Patrick, you're welcome back. This is your third time.
I know, right? Do I get a jacket or an insignia?
You didn't get your Rolex?
Something? I don't know.
Your hat trick Rolex? Yeah, well, it's in the mail.
Thanks.
It should be there soon.
Okay.
Now, Andy, you're probably unfamiliar with this, but on In the Fire, we always start with a hard-hitting question. It's to help our guests kind of calm down and relax. So it's usually the most difficult question of the entire hour. But for you, I thought we could do the hard-hitting question British edition. And so I actually have 5 sort of rapid-fire questions for you. Are you ready?
I know. But let's go for it.
You're going to do great. Question number 1. How long would it take an American missionary to learn the language?
Superficially about 6 weeks. I mean, properly like a lifetime.
Like biscuits and crackers and cookies and cakes and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, boots rather than trunks and
Schedule versus schedule.
Yeah, very good.
That one's ridiculous. I don't understand that one. All right, next question. Who is the greatest British person of all time?
Well, that is about the most controversial question you can ask right now, because if you'd asked me a few years ago, I'd have to say people like Winston Churchill, who's one of my all-time faves. But politically, that's now a bit more, a complex than it once was. But for me, he is still a hero. And then for some of our Christian heroes, I think you have to look at some of the missionaries. My personal all-time favorite missionary is not very well known, but a guy called Matthew Henry, who saw very little fruit in his lifetime, but during the course of his lifetime translated the Bible into languages that a vast proportion of the world's population could understand. And so for me, he's a quite remarkable character and deserves to be widely read and studied.
Patrick, do you agree?
No, I was going to say Mrs. Doubtfire, but
Mrs. Doubtfire.
Yeah, that
100%.
That was what I was kind of thinking.
All right. 0 for 2, Andy. Let's keep going.
Okay.
Question number 3.
Yeah.
Why do you all drink such nasty brown water? You know coffee exists, right?
Yeah, it tastes better and it's more civilized.
Over 3.
Is that like Grey Poupon?
Andy. Grey Poupon.
Is that
mustard?
Yeah, mustard. Okay.
Andy, are you one of the Peaky Blinders?
No comment. I'm not. Who's listening to the podcast?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can declare.
That
my
is
true
one of the
identity.
best shows. That is one of the best shows I've ever watched. I love, and it's bad. So if you're under the age of 18 and you're listening to this, don't watch it. That should take care of that, right? People tend to listen when you say don't watch something. It always works. But yeah, I love that show. Alfie Solomon's. She's one of my favorites.
Stop. Please.
All right. That was
I
it.
love it. I love
All right, Andy, give us your best American accent.
So I really wish my daughter was here because she just has this. She grew up with like the Barbie show and has this weird South Californian drawl that is just amazing. Yeah, and then when I do an American accent, it just turns into some weird Australian thing. So I'm very, very scared. What do you want me to say in an American accent? And then I'll try and say it.
Well, probably what you think that we would say in an American accent, which is, I'd like a number 3 deluxe meal with extra large fries and a milkshake.
Okay. Hey, I'd like a number 3 deluxe meal with extra fries and a milkshake. Why is it taking so long? What's wrong with you?
That was really good.
That was very like Northeast, I feel.
I was
like,
going to say, maybe Philadelphia?
Little Philly, New York vibe.
I clearly have watched too many Mark Wahlberg movies.
There you go.
Very kind of, slightly angry.
So Patrick, the question then is, was his American accent better than my British accent?
That's gonna be a no for me, dog. Like, it's gonna be a no for me.
So I'm 0 for 5.
Oh man.
No, but though, Loki, there's a clip that's going viral right now of Loki being interviewed. I don't know the actor, Tom Hiddleston, I think is his name, but he's talking about walking his dog in New York, and everybody can walk their dog without a leash before 9:00. And he's in a very proper British accent. He's walking his dog, and then the New York policeman comes by and he pivots to like a New York accent. He's like, "Hey, Loki, put your dog on a leash. It's after 9." And it's like, it's very succinct and hilarious, but I digress.
That's pretty good. I on The Greatest British Person to Ever Live, I also would have accepted Wallace from Wallace and Gromit.
Yeah.
Or Jeremy Clarkson.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Big
have
fan.
you seen his farming show?
Love it. My wife and I watch every episode.
I was gonna say Gordon Ramsay. Honestly, he's done a lot.
Gordon
for
Ramsay
us here in terms of taste,
game
which is
changer.
ironic because you don't generally think with food and British and that whole thing. But
I just love our exports to your country. People like Simon Cowell, and that whole sort of, we need a Brit to come over and judge us, and I'm very happy to do that on this podcast.
Well, there's an existential question there. Was it actually a revolutionary war or was it a civil war? Because we were still technically, these are the questions. So hard hitting.
I literally had a FanDuel bet going. How long before the Revolutionary War got brought up? What was we didn't make it. We're 9 minutes in. I mean, this is bad.
Well,
Andy, we're gonna move past the war. It's time to talk about the Lord and his work.
Okay, good,
so
good.
Andy, tell us a little bit about where you're from, and then I'm gonna have Patrick tell us about how you and he met. So give us a little backstory. Who's Andy Weatherly? Where is he? What's he doing?
Yeah, good question. I am married to Joanne. We've been married for just over 20 years. We've got 2 kids, 2 wonderful, I was going to say teenagers. One of them becomes a teenager next month. So, we live in Birmingham, which is right in the middle of England, about 2 hours northwest of London. If you can imagine a map of the UK, that will help you sort of figure that out. I came to Birmingham to study engineering at university, or school, as you would say. And that was 27 years ago, and I have never left, despite telling God the day I graduate is the day I leave. But not my will, but his will, it turns out. And so 17 years ago, I planted a church here, which I am still at as the senior pastor. And then over the last 17 years, been involved in various church planting projects for the city of Birmingham. And so still I'm involved in particularly training church planters. That is my passion, whilst being pastor of a church at the same time.
Wow. That's fantastic. So at what point did you go from engineering to ministry? What was that like?
Well, I spent about 6 weeks in engineering, so that really didn't take too long. And then I felt called to help on campus ministry. So I was involved in campus ministry for a few years, first as a volunteer, but then in a paid role for about 3 years. And it was during that time really that I felt a particularly strong call to ministry, and that became a call to church planting ministry because of where the church I was part of at the time, what they were looking to do. So they wanted us to be involved in church planting, and I said yes and was available. And that's basically how we then got involved in church planting, and but stayed pretty close to church planting ever since then, really.
That's incredible. I didn't tell you this, but I too started out in engineering, and I made it only slightly further than you. I started my freshman year. I was at the top of the class, like did great. Mass, vectors, acceleration, all of those things. And then we got into quarks and leptons, and my slightly below average sized brain I just couldn't understand what my professor was saying. And I have decided to this day that quarks and leptons aren't real. They're made up and it's fake. But it was enough to get me out of engineering. And then a few years later, I felt called to ministry. So quarks and leptons, be praised.
I was never top of the class. I started out sort of very average in my class and probably went down from there. About a third of my year at university went on to be accountants, which tells you about how hard the maths is on my course, that basically accountants are the people who get recruited out of it in the end. And maths was never like, I enjoy doing sums. I enjoy the feeling of completion at the end of that. But I think there is something that happens in university maths where, for want of a better word, it just gets weird.
It does.
It never made sense to me beyond a particular point. And that became the point at which I decided maybe engineering was not quite for me.
Well, speaking of weird, Patrick, how did you and Andy meet?
Well, just a couple of follow-ups. One, I want to bring us back because we may have lost some of our audience when we were talking about leprechauns and other things just now. So just to circle back, I do have. I'll tell you how we met in just a moment. Andy, what are the football teams in Birmingham? Just that might be an anchor for people.
Yeah, so we've got a number. We've got so Aston Villa are our Premier League team at the moment. West Bromwich Albion, not far behind in the Championship. Birmingham City as well, and Wolverhampton Wanderers not very far away. So they are not quite in Birmingham itself, but just on the other side.
Awesome.
Let's see. There's another team called Warsaw who have American owners as well.
Well,
so yeah, there's quite a number, but none of them quite operating at the top end of the Premiership as of right now.
It's tough. All right. So, how did we meet? I'll tell you. So, started out big picture, I kind of oversee our global missions here at the church, and we were talking as a global mission committee, how can we help our people engage with, culturally where our world is going? And one of the ways we could strategically do that is by investing a little bit more in the UK. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, it's the language is not hard to translate. The distance is not as far as going around the world. And culturally, we're very, very similar, although very different at the same time. And so there's some parallels there, especially being in the mid-Atlantic, a little closer than maybe the South, but still different. And there's this affiliation called the UK Partnership, which I had sort of heard about through social media and some colleagues that I have in ministry. And I began to just do some praying and some investigating. What is this UK partnership? What is partnership? Lots of questions. Discovered that it basically, and this, I don't mean this to sound simplistic, but it's the easiest way that I can describe it, is bringing indigenous native pastors in a country together with American pastors in a meet and greet. So to summarize it, I kind of think of it as speed dating church planters. The reason I do that is because, or say it that way, is because the mechanism for meeting folks is this meeting, which is where I met Andy. The meeting of the UK partnership 2 years ago was in Charlotte, North Carolina, at a church there, and literally it was one day. There was about 20 different pastors from all over the UK, including Scotland and England, and basically they just presented. They presented for 15 minutes, and you rotated through these different churches and their stories and their needs and ways that you could come alongside and support them. And Andy presented, and then there was a dinner, and I didn't really know anybody at the dinner. It was my first time, and then Andy, I think it was his second time sort of involved, and we ended up sitting across from each other, had a great conversation that in a very loud bar, and just hit it off and thought like, hey man, this was great. Like kind of, there was some synergy, and, we wanted to keep the conversation going. And so we kept in touch via email. And then this past fall in 2023, we met up in Edinburgh and just spent more time together with one of our elders. And it was just a great time. So it's been a progressive sort of growth in friendship, essentially. Is that a fair summary, Andy? Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, very much. I have different memories because I was one of the people doing the presentations. So for me, it doesn't feel so much like speed dating as being on Shark Tank or something like that. But yes, I get the I get the illustration from the other side.
It sounds like partnership at first sight,
It's a beautiful thing.
A tale as old as time. So, that's really interesting. So, Patrick, as you have sort of been in this world and connected with Andy, how did you sort of determine the fit here? I think it's, and we'll get to what Andy's doing in just a minute, but I want our folks to sort of understand a little bit of how the global missions works at Chapelgate, because I think it's going to help us understand why we're supporting a work like Andy's. And then Andy, we're going to actually talk about your stuff you're going on over there and how you are really in this podcast for the most part going to be helping us. But before we do that, I got to make Patrick look good.
Yeah, well, no, thanks. Because I need all the help in that arena that I can get at any given moment. In terms of like why this is the way we do it, I think you have to like zoom out a little bit. In the American West, we're still very resource heavy in terms of people and financial resources. And in other parts of the West where the church is smaller, maybe not as well connected, there is a need for shared partnership. And that's not one way, that's actually two ways. We need to learn from where the culture is in these other countries and these other places to prepare ourselves for that reality here. In terms of our global missions, we do a separate fund for that. And our vision is to come alongside indigenous church planters. And so if you think about it like a bullseye and a target, Andy and his church, he's not a missionary. He's a pastor in a city with a local context. And we want to come alongside brothers and sisters in prayer and relationship and financial support with folks like Andy, not just in the UK, but like really all over the world. So we support a lot of pastors who are doing good works, especially like in the UK and in Tokyo, where we support several Japanese pastors who are doing work there. And, we think of partnership, we think of the marriage of the church, the organization, and the individual person, and sort of working through that paradigm for partnership is what we're all about. So we have a separate fund that we raise support for that's totally separate from our general fund. And we just think it's good for everybody, even if it's just a little bit, to be engaged in mission where they are.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Thanks for that insight. So then, Andy, give us a little background. And you did, when you visited here a couple of weeks ago, you did share about, how you sort of have been in the context of a pastor of a church, but then also started meeting some other folks. And could you walk us through again a little bit of how the Birmingham connection began?
The Birmingham connection with Chapelgate, or with some broader things in terms of what we've been doing church planting wise?
Yes.
That one. Okay. Yeah. So Birmingham is the biggest city you've not heard of in the UK. I mean, I know there is a Birmingham in Alabama, but in terms of the UK, it's the second largest city in the UK. So about 2.5 million people in the metro area. But because it doesn't have the influence and wealth of London, or it doesn't have the beauty of Edinburgh, or it doesn't have the prestige and academia of Oxford or Cambridge, it's an easy place to overlook. But I think it's a really significant city, because what we're experiencing is what the rest of the UK is experiencing, at least in terms of the urban centres. So I would say to people that the three things to know about the city is it is incredibly religious. So of the 1.1 million people living inside our sort of inner ring road, we have about somewhere between a quarter and a third of those are Muslims. So it's an incredibly religious city, 250 mosques across the city. So it's incredibly religious, but not in the way that people might expect of the UK, where you might expect that there's a lot of people going to nice Anglican churches with big spires and big buildings. Actually, the strange thing is, as you travel around Birmingham, just how few spires you can see. We are trying pretty hard to plant contextualized churches. So churches that are not looking like the churches that we might have planted or been involved in planting previously. So churches that might centre predominantly around food, for example, on a Sunday. And with that, I'm not just saying, they have a meal sometimes after a church service, but the church service is centred around a meal. One of the buildings that folks meet in is not located right in the heart of one of those districts with a very strong Muslim majority neighborhood, deliberately so that folks can leave the community without feeling they're being seen leaving the community, so that there's a safe place that they can go to and engage. We have churches with big outreach programs amongst particularly immigrant communities, so folks who are very new to the city. Lots of us, including at our church, we have an English club. At our English club, there's about 25 people that meet every week to come and learn English, but at the end of the club, they're invited to a Bible study that starts straight after the English club. So they just stay in the room, and about 2/3 of that English club then will stay and study the Bible together. And largely those people who have no Christian background at all. And again, a significant number of folks who be coming from Muslim backgrounds. So it's looking for those obvious contact points where we can serve the city and serve people who are coming into the city, and figure out how we start to develop deeper relationships with people, but within a context where we can share the gospel. And obviously from those kinds of things that we've been involved in, again, as a church, we run incredible socials at things like Lunar New Year, or at different points in the year, Eid celebrations, for example, where we get the opportunity either to invite people in, or we get to go over and spend time in people's homes. And through that, again, there's lots of context for relationship, but it's not just sort of arm's length friendship, but a context where we're expecting to share the gospel, and people do have a general openness to hearing about the gospel.
So one of the things that I think is also super helpful is, how would you describe the difference between, here we are, we're in Marysville, Maryland, right? We're in a suburb area, you're in a city, but I think even more, you're in a different kind of city than we encounter here. You mentioned that people, they live, work, and play exactly where they live, and they walk places. Is that, can you share a little bit about what that's like there?
Yeah, so thanks, Rob. Yeah, because when we talked, I think I sort of talked about how local the city functions, and therefore there's an importance, not just as we think about planting churches, for the city to reach the city. And again, the city is it's not just religious, it's also incredibly secular, particularly from our understanding as Christians. So a very, very small percentage of people are in church Sunday by Sunday, and in an evangelical church it's even less. So we think our numbers are around or under 2% are going to an evangelical church week by week. But then, as you said there, Rob, the city functions incredibly locally. I mean, very few cities, I would guess, in the US would work in that same way without the reliance on the car in the same way. But in our neighborhood, we have people who would expect to, even if they don't work within the neighborhood, they'd expect to socialize and shop either in their neighborhood or the next neighborhood along. So it's not the case that people are driving 5 miles to go and do their soccer practice, or they're driving their kids 6 miles in the opposite direction to take them to school or something like that. Everything happens within a particular locality. So around 80% of our church members can walk to church on a Sunday morning, and that is not regarded as strange. But again, what that provides is very particular and unique opportunities, because what we've noticed is that our church is counted as the local parish church. And that's not something we've said of ourselves particularly, although we're quite happy to wear that kind of moniker. But that's how people regard us, because we are made up of people. We are obviously within the local community. We have our stalls at the local music festival that happens in our local neighborhood. When Christmas is happening, we're pretty obvious in terms of what we're doing locally. That mean that people regard us as their local church, which means that when people do hit crisis, or if people are intrigued to find out about Christianity, we're the place they come. So it does provide us with some, I think, unique opportunities. One of the significant things for us is just longevity in relationships. So again, we've got people in our street. I mean, I think when we moved here, we moved in the same weekend that we planted the church. We didn't design it like that. It's just how it happened. But then over 17 years in the same place, living on the street that we do, with people walking past our house all the time. And just as we get to do life with our neighbors around us, we get opportunities just to interact with people that we don't know particularly well, but they become friends and different things. The opportunity of working and functioning pretty locally at a neighborhood level means that we get to see people become Christians. And it's a slow process. Typically it might be, 10 years between sort of getting to know someone and seeing them become a Christian. But over that time, because we're working and living and functioning locally, you get to know people pretty well.
See, I think that is really different than here. Would you agree, Patrick?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, the idea of a neighborhood parish and identifying where you live, work, and play all together, sort of integrated life, that's so different than suburban life. Although I will say the diversity that we're experiencing in our community here is just a huge, huge parallel.
Yeah, and that is, I mean, I'm seeing that, right? So Andy, I live in a place called Eldersburg, and it's actually in a different county than where Chapelgate is. And historically, the Carroll County area has been very rural, very agricultural, like small town feel. And in the past 10 to 15 years, it's really exploded. A lot of new restaurants are coming in. A lot of new ethnicities are coming in. It was predominantly, I would say, a very white area, and it is becoming more and more diverse. And I live in a townhome community. And the part of what you were sharing that was most interesting to me, beyond just the walking distance, like hyper localness of it, was the 10 years. There's no way that the neighbors I have today will be here in 4 years, much less 10 years. We just move. I think part of that's probably because we're so close to DC and to Fort Meade, and there's a lot of government jobs where you move because that's how your career path is going. But people are also so upwardly mobile in this area that they don't stick around for long. I mean, it's just fascinating.
Yeah, and one of the challenges we've got is that where you have significant proportions of minorities, they will inevitably, understandably from a human perspective, stick together and form quite tight communities. That then what you actually have is, rather than a singular community that feels like a melting pot, actually you've got multiple different communities but living on top of one another. And so the question is, how then do you break into some of those communities rather than just feeling like you're living parallel lives, particularly where you feel like there are people living at different economic levels or different educational and background levels. And so those are some of the challenges that we're trying to overcome as a church, because similar to the situation you've described, how do you break into, some of those communities as you watch it change? We do have some of that transition. We're in the city, so there's always an input and output. There's always a flow through the city. But then I think we've noticed a particular opportunity where there are people who've stayed, that we get some long-term opportunities through that.
Yeah, I'm encouraged as you're talking just to feel a sense of, and Patrick, you talk about this a lot, but to think through how, there's that old phrase, God intends you to be a missionary wherever your 2 feet are. And Patrick, you open this up with the indigenous nature of, Andy and our partnership with Andy. Andy, this place. You've been there for many, many years. You're part of this place, this city, this part of the city even, and sort of seeing how, and maybe even asking the question, how can Rob and Kate, how can me and my wife see our home where we're located as a missions field, and to pay attention to some of those patterns, systems, dynamics that are at play. So I think, I'm even thinking right now, I go in where I am, I would say the gathering place is actually the recreational sports leagues. I think that seeing that, kids' soccer field is not just, this is a place where my kid plays soccer, well, football, sorry, Andy. But this is a place where I'm now standing shoulder to shoulder with a bunch of other people on a sideline. And can I build relationships with them? Yeah, I'm going to see you at least once a week for the next 10 weeks. I mean, that's a different way to see recreational sports.
Because you are in that integrated context, right? So do your folks, they engage or have relationships, I'm assuming, with these folks from various faith backgrounds, and it's sort of all intermingled? Like, is there any sense of confusion on how to engage, or is it more just normative? Like, they just engage with these folks like all the time, so it's not odd or different or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges that we all face, and you guys will know this as much from where you are as well, but just the temptation when you're feeling like a minority as Christians, the temptation is to operate tribally. So church can become the place of safety, but it also can become the social environment where I feel most safe, because this is the place where other people share my values and those sorts of things. And so you guys understand that politically as well, with some of those things. I think part of what we're continually doing is trying to model for people and teach into that, to turn that inside out. Of course, church ought to be the place of safety, and the church is the church. It has its own unique character, and we're not so open with what we think the church is, that we're not distinguishing what it is to be a church member and how the church functions internally for provision of pastoral care and everything else. But we are also called to be a sent community, and we can't just function fleeing the culture that we're in, but also operating to be sent and released out. And so that does characterize some of the things that we sort of celebrate, some of the stories that we tell. Obviously, it directs a lot of how we spend our budget, of how we sort of run events and operate things, so that people are continually operating with a degree of discomfort to say, I want church to feel, my safety backstop. These are relationships that I feel safe in, but also this is a place that's calling me to the place of discomfort as well. And obviously, as you mentioned there, Rob, with the sports teams and things like that. Similarly for us, sport is a great way where we can, where it breaks down all sorts of barriers, but also looking at some of the other places that happens, like the school, or some of the places that are social mixing points within our community, and wanting Christians and talking for us as a congregation to think, how do we operate missionally within those contexts, rather than just expecting people to come to us. So I think that is an enormous challenge, but I think for us, we've done a lot of thinking, and we do a lot of work with people so that we are continually commissioning people into those environments. Is that a big challenge for you as well?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Comfort is the idol that we transact in, right? It's comfort and safety. just the idea that, we can protect and hold on to those things. And, we create these systems that give us the illusion of that, but we all know at the end of the day that things are not safe, and comfort is only temporary, and it doesn't ultimately satisfy. And so if there's that longing for something more, what do we try to fill it with? And I do think that mission always breeds renewal spiritually. When you begin to look outside of yourself and look to the needs that God has placed uniquely before you, because it's different a little bit for everyone. There was a season in our old house where there was a little girl whose mom was probably on drugs, and I think she was like 6 or 7. My girls would play with her like every day, and they would just, as kids, just welcome her, just say, "Hey, would you come? You want to have dinner with us?" And I think there was a period of like 4 or 5 months where like 4 out of 5 or 7 nights of the week she was eating dinner with us. And it wasn't anything extra. I mean, we always had leftovers because my kids eat like little birds. But it was a posture to a need that was right before you. Now, not everybody has those kinds of encounters, but what are the unique needs that God has put before you? I mean, how have you and your wife, Joe, sort of navigated that? I mean, you're a pastor, which probably I imagine in Birmingham is just like, what? You do what?
Yeah.
You've got this ministry. Have you found it ways to sort of come alongside people that in your lifestyle?
Yeah, I think very, very much there's a regular kind of we have an openness with how we regard our home. That means we've had a whole bunch of people over the years, sometimes staying with us, living with us, or as you said, Patrick, people who are kind of joining us for meals or a series of meals. And that can come down. I don't want to sort of, just sort of say, hey, you have to do this big thing about your home. But let me just kind of maybe point out a couple of things that have been quite helpful for us. We've had some folks in the church who've really taken to adoption and fostering and that sort of thing. For them, there's been radical openness of home to bring folks in. Now, that's not fostering or adopting kids from overseas. That's folks who have been removed from really tough family situations. Yeah. So that would be kind of one of. But there's a significant number of our kids who are in that group who are within the church. For us as a family, I'll tell you just one thing that we've tried to do is for our kids to help them sort of think, what does it mean for us to have an open home? It means that actually things like our games consoles and TVs and stuff like that, it's all centrally in the living room, and our kids really want to invite their friends over, and when they come over, we get to meet them, hang out with them, chat to them a little bit, get to know them, and just building something of that into a family culture, so that it's not just there's always strangers in the house that they don't know as adults, but also for us as adults to get to know them and their friends, and to have that open policy so that the kids know that there's always extra meals available for any of their friends who are around. And then what we found is that our kids have got very good at adapting to just having extra adults in the house and knowing that there's always a throughput of people. And they might be people who are really on the fringe of things. They're people who might really struggle with English, or they might be going through really tough times. They might not want to be very chatty. And our kids have got very good at also relating to folks who are coming in from particularly tough situations and that sort of thing. And again, similar to what you must be facing, we notice there's a significant number of people really battling with mental health needs and some of the challenges around that. So actually just making our home a place of peace, a place where they feel like, actually, I can unwind and this is safe to be myself. And again, we have to tell off our kids in front of them and different things, but they know that we're not a perfect family putting on a perfect front. And actually, I think understanding that home can be a genuine place where they're seeing the piece of the gospel work out, even if they don't know that for themselves personally. I just think
I mean, I think that speaks to a little bit like Edith Schaefer, Francis Schaeffer's wife, used to say, like, your marriage might be the only real marriage that some folks ever see. If you're married and you're opening your home in that way. So there's another layer to, that whole picture.
Yeah, and we always say that hospitality isn't around putting on a nice meal for someone, but opening your life such to the degree that people can see where it requires faith.
And that's so difficult, I mean, I'm hearing you share, and I, like, there's so much of me that's like, oh, I wish I could do that. I want to do that, but I'm terrified to do that because you hit it on the head, Andy. Our idea of hospitality is it's and we don't do china anymore, but it's the nicer silverware and plates. It's maybe some floral arrangements and candles at the center of the table, and it's a nice glass of wine, and everything's calm, and it is a break from the chaos. I have to have it all ready. My life has to be perfect in order to let you in. I mean, I feel this as a father. Kate and I talk about this all the time. It's like we have 4 children. Our oldest is about to turn 5. And so we're outside in our neighborhood. And like you said, like sometimes I have to correct my children, but I know that people are watching me, and I'm like, oh, don't mess this up, Rob. Like this is like, don't be too hard, but don't be too lenient. And it's just, I get so up in my head. And so I just feel like, wow, to process that, the idea that, my home can be a great place of missions. It's pressing against the independence, I think, that I want to feel, that I don't need others, maybe that others don't even need me, and that actually my primary goal and objective is to create this sort of retreat in my house. I don't, there's no question in that. I think I'm sharing what is being evoked in my own mind and heart as we talk about these things.
But then some of the opportunities, as the way you've described your community, that's maybe more transient. What you're likely to have within a community then is a whole load of people for whom this doesn't feel like home, and so it's thinking, well, how can we make it, even if they're only here for 18 months? How do we make some sense of home for them, for neighbors? And that might be like going around and visiting them, and it might be, for us, we found that there's a whole group of people. Actually, they won't receive invitations to come into our house. Just culturally, that is not appropriate. So for us, it's taken a bit of a mind shift for me to think, maybe I need to invite people to a third space. There's a local restaurant that I know that they would feel safe in. And so actually inviting folks there. Sometimes I do sometimes with our folks we've got a large influx of people from Hong Kong. Recently, I got much more bold just about inviting myself over to their house. Actually more comfortable exercising hospitality, and actually for me to receive hospitality is a blessing for them and a sign that we are truly, connecting, and it's really real. And I think sometimes, for us, it's not just about thinking like, how can I use what assets I have to serve other people, but as I'm seeking to serve people, what does it mean to really demonstrate or help them sort of feel a sense of home and a sense of love, and those sorts of things. I also think I'm legitimized by Jesus. He had no problem inviting himself into other people's homes. So I think there's a good.
I'm going to stay at your house a couple of days, is what he said, right? It's like,
yeah, I've not said that yet.
Jesus,
Zacchaeus,
Jesus
right?
is a bad American.
He's like, I'm going to come stay at your house a couple of days.
Well, in the time we have left here, I'd love to hear a little bit, Andy, about what are the kind of where your church and where the church planting, network that you guys are in, where are you headed? Where do you see God leading? And what are some of the opportunities and maybe even challenges that you're running into right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the significant thing as we look back is just seeing a remarkable work of God. I'm just so encouraged. We often talk about, well, you referenced it earlier, Patrick, but just experiencing life in a post-Christian context. I think increasingly I feel like we're in a pre-Christian context where I'm working, where people don't even know the first thing about Christianity. It's not even something they're necessarily conscious that the culture's rejected. It's just so irrelevant and not part of their life. So we're not growing up with a generation away from going to Sunday school or something. It is so far back now in people's consciousness that it's never formed part of their awareness. They still regard themselves as spiritual people. But then into that, I sort of think then, as you travel over to the UK, it is like entering a time machine, seeing what it looks like to be in a culture that maybe is a few years down the line on some of that. And I just think I'm so encouraged, because I think we've seen that really bottom out. A few of us started praying to see God do something remarkable here several years ago from different church backgrounds and things. And over the last 14 years, we've seen an answer to our prayer. We were praying for 20 new churches to be planted by the year 2020, and we've seen so far 26 churches be planted, which is quite remarkable. Our prayer from 2020 has been to see a further 30 churches planted by the year 2030. So that would be 50 new churches by the year 2050. And as I say, we're sort of over halfway at that marker so far. I was having a conversation with a church planter yesterday, a guy who planted from us about 10 years ago. It will be their 10-year anniversary. And they, as a church plant, are just in the throes of discussing where their next church plant is going to take place and how they make that happen. So I'm just so encouraged. We look out. I sort of think, I think of the conversations we've had. We think we can see where the next 7 or 8 churches are coming from in terms of people who are currently training or praying about a specific area of the city that they feel called to reach. So as I look out on it, I just think, a city that looked spiritually barren now has these incredible beacons of life and light all across the city. And those things, again, as you go and visit them, they look relatively unremarkable. They're churches that might be 50, 60, 70, 80 people in them. But they are places where we're seeing God doing a work that previously had seen nothing happen at all. And so I feel like we're so encouraged. We're right at the start of things still, but we're so encouraged to see what God has already done. And then the big challenges going forward, obviously in terms of raising up leaders, particularly leaders who can work cross-culturally. So we've been praying about that. And again, we've seen some very significant answers to prayer. We've got a number of guys coming from either Muslim countries or Muslim backgrounds who themselves have come to Christ and now are interested in church planting, and 1 or 2 of those guys are very clearly already church planting, and then there is a flow of those guys now coming through. So we're hugely excited about what that might mean for the city, because I recognise as a white guy from a middle class community, I'm going to struggle to gain traction in some parts of the city that are most needy. And then I think just looking at the needs of the city is getting poorer, in my view, not wealthier. And so there's our city hall went bankrupt the end of last year. So some of the provision within the city and care within the city is really being dropped. And so I think one of the big challenges that we're looking at, along with a whole bunch of other churches, is saying, what is our calling in this arena? What are we called to do that we were not doing previously? And so, provision for homeless folks, looking at what we do in terms of some of the racial integration stuff, looking at some of the stuff that might be more challenging that the city itself took responsibility for previously, but is going to be unable to. We're praying into that and sort of discerning what our calling might be, not just as a church local, but with other church leaders to say, what is our calling as a church cross-denominationally into all of this? Those are things that are kind of consuming me right now.
So that's a pretty big thing, like filling in the gap where the state can't, or in your case, can't meet the needs of the people. That's pretty profound that you all would even consider that.
Yeah, we feel like there's something kind of ironic that's going on here, in the sense that it was always the church. 150 years ago, it was the church that provided the vast majority of social services for the city. And as the city got wealthier and the state got wealthier, it co-opted all of those things. And the church let it. For good or ill, the church permitted all of that to go on, and to take responsibility for all of those things. But now that the state is in retreat, we feel we have a strong obligation to again move back into that space and figure out what is our obligation in this season. and not just an obligation that we own, but with it all the missional opportunities. What is God going to do through some of those things as we seek to seep into the gaps of the city as the state retreats? What is God calling us to do into all of that?
Yeah, it is. It's interesting, Andy. I a few years ago had the privilege of going on an educational trip and meeting with church planters in Athens, Greece. And one of the things that was most, eye-opening to me was exactly what you're talking about. They're planting these churches, and they're hyper-local plants. But one of the churches experienced the greatest growth because they started a library for kids. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, why would that work? I mean, it doesn't. There's like a million libraries. Why would? And they said, no, there's none. There's no library. And we provided a library, and all of a sudden we have this bridge, this open door, because we provided a service for our community, and the community can literally see and feel that we are here to love and care for them. And so there's almost a sense in which this could be a great opportunity.
Yeah, well, there is talk in our city of them closing down 30 plus libraries because they're the easy things to get rid of. And again, one of the things that we're thinking through as a church is there, as we think about our church building project. So we're looking to acquire property. I've got a big meeting tomorrow with the City Hall, so you can pray into that. I'm excited. We've made an offer for the building, and we want to know what the city will make of it. They need to dispose of assets, so it's a good time to ask. So you can pray into that. But there are a whole bunch of different things that we're looking at, library being one of them, to say what are going to be the needs of this community moving forward. I've got it from where I am right now, about 300 yards away is our local community library, which is very likely to close within the next few months. So for us to be thinking through what does it mean for us as a church, and what opportunities that might be. I mean, it's a calling, it's obligation, but also opportunities with it. So those things are things that we are interested in, praying in, but for us feel very, very real. And not just for us as a congregation, but as I say, we're talking with a whole bunch of church leaders from across the city saying, what are you doing? What do we think we should do? What could we do if we work together? And what do we think really is expected of us by God in this season?
That's incredible, Andy. Thank you so much, man, for your time, for sharing, some of what's going on over there and in Birmingham, and just, it's always pleasant to be with you, and just so grateful for you and for your ministry, and for your encouragement for me and for Patrick and for all the folks listening, just to continue to prayerfully seek opportunities to share the good news of Jesus Christ in word and in deed. Both are important. So Patrick, maybe just as a final question, if folks are, if they're excited about what Andy's doing, how can they get on board with supporting?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we support Andy's pastoral. What would you call Josh? Is he a resident pastoral?
Yeah, he started out as an intern resident, and he's actually graduated, and he's now a co-pastor for children and some of our outreach ministries. So he's doing such a good job. We couldn't just keep him as a resident. He's involved in all our youth student ministries and different things. So we're hugely grateful. We could not, I would say this, Patrick, I am profoundly grateful for the relationship that we've got with Chapelgate. And it was a real privilege for me to come over and meet some of you folks and get to know the church a little bit better. We could not resource some of the things that we're doing without the partnership with Chapelgate and a couple of other churches in the state. So we are just really, really profoundly grateful. So I do want to say to folks listening in, thank you so much for our partnership. It is a special partnership that for us has genuine impact, long-term impact on the ground.
As we grow, we're going to deepen that. But if people want to jump on, I always encourage people. People say, I don't want to give to a big fund, but you give to our Global Missions Fund, and we're able to continue to expand what we're doing. And we support Josh and Tab and his wife, and we're doing that this year. And I'm sure there will be another need next year or the year after that. And that's what partnership is. So I would encourage people to give to that so that we can continue to expand and deepen our partnerships there.
Well, Well, guys, thank you so much for being here. And as always, we remember that this is God's work, and we're just riding the Holy Spirit's wave here. And this is a very exciting, sometimes scary, but mostly exciting thing that we get to do. And it's a blast to do it alongside you all. So for those of you listening, thanks for being part of today. And we hope that you'll tune in again next week for another episode of In the Fire. And in the meantime, if you ever need a thing, please feel free to reach out. I put my email address down below. I will not put Patrick or Andy's down below unless they ask me to. But you can always reach out. We would love to hear from you and know how we can better serve and care for you. So until next week, we'll talk soon.